Bom, vou começar a falar um pouquinho aqui do nosso palestrante, enquanto a gente já vai preparando esse contato com ele. Nós vamos agora nessa próxima sessão, que vai se iniciar em instantes, nós vamos falar sobre o tema Construindo organizações para o futuro e para a humanidade. O nosso ilustre convidado, que vai participar com a gente de forma remota, ele é professor da London Business School, é o Sr. Gary Hamel. O Gary Hamel, ele é um dos pensadores de negócios mais influentes e iconoclastas do mundo. Ele trabalhou com empresas líderes em todo o mundo e é um palestrante de gestão dinâmico e muito procurado. O Hamel, ele faz parte do corpo docente da London Business School há mais de 30 anos e é diretor do Management Lab. Vamos ver se a gente já tem o Gary Hamel conectado conosco. Já podemos chamá-lo? Ainda não? Ok. Então, enquanto a gente fica aqui no aguardo dessa conexão, eu vou perguntar para o nosso presidente João Galassi. João, por acaso, enquanto a gente aguarda essa conexão aqui do Gary Hamel, eu já reforcei alguns recados. Você quer reforçar alguma coisa aqui comigo enquanto a gente tem aqui alguns segundinhos ou alguns minutos, bem rapidamente, antes de estabelecer essa conexão com o Gary?
O Braga, a gente consegue soltar o vídeo de encerramento? Aí nós poderíamos ganhar esse tempinho.
Hello, Gary, can you hear us? 1, 2, 3, testing. Gary, can you hear us? Just testing the interpretation. This is the interpreter. 1, 2, 3. Can you hear us, Gary? 1, 2, 3, testing. 1, 2, 3. Hi, Gary, this is Julia, this is the interpreter. We are just checking if you can hear us from the interpretation booth, so we can translate for you the questions in Portuguese. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Testing, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Testing.
Vai cantar também, canta muito. Nós vamos correr esse risco só de meia hora, tá, pessoal? Eu até fiz uma brincadeira hoje de manhã, falei assim, já arriscamos com o morgado mesmo, pode arriscar mais um pouquinho. Brincadeirinha, hein?
João, o vídeo está no ponto, se você quiser chamar.
Então pode soltar o vídeo.
Estamos juntos novamente, reunindo os maiores empresários e executivos do setor, assim como importantes fornecedores, parceiros e autoridades, para a realização do encontro mais esperado do segmento mercadista.
Parabéns a todo o time da Abras, parabéns a todos vocês que juntos, construíram mais uma edição da Convenção Abras 2022. Bom, vamos então para a nossa sessão, que se inicia agora. Falaremos sobre o tema Construindo organizações para o futuro e para a humanidade. O nosso ilustre convidado que vai participar conosco de forma remota, ele é professor da London Business School, Sr. Gary Hamel. Gary Hamel é um dos pensadores de negócios mais influentes e iconoclastas do mundo. Ele trabalhou com empresas, líderes em todo o mundo e é um palestrante de gestão dinâmico e procurado. O Hamel, ele faz parte do corpo docente da London Business School há mais de 30 anos e é diretor do Management Lab. Seja muito bem-vindo, é com você, Gary Hamel. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much. It's a wonderful pleasure to be with you. I am so sorry that my responsibilities here at the London Business School prevented me from being there with all of you. I've been to Brazil many times. It's always an exciting place. And I'm sure the next hour or so, we are going to have a fantastic conversation together. You know, I know that Abras is doing so much to help to reinvent the entire supermarket sector in Brazil. It is working to build new ecosystems that will enable every competitor to be more vital and more up to date. But I'd really like to talk this afternoon with you about what you do in your own organization to intercept the future. How do you build an organization that is truly fit for the future? And I want to be both quite radical because I believe we are at a point in business history where we need to think radically, but I'm also going to be very practical. I want to give you some very practical things you can do inside your organization to unleash the initiative and the ingenuity of every single human being at work. So let's get started. We all understand that today we live in the age of upheaval. Literally, change has changed in our lifetimes. It is exponential. It is unrelenting. It is often unforgiving and sometimes surprising. We live in a world where the future is less and less an extrapolation of the past. And this will test the ability of every individual, every institution, and every government to change as fast as the world around it. So we can see this already, how it's changing our lives. It's changing how we move money around and how we transact with a new bank and PayPal and all these new financial alternatives. It's changing dramatically the way we consume media with YouTube and Netflix and so on. It is changing the way we connect with one another, the way we hook up or find a date. It's radically changing how we move ourselves around as we now are going towards electric vehicles. It has changed completely the way we communicate as I'm joining you here this evening. And it's also dramatically changing the way we think about food. What we want from a retailer, how it's delivered, the quality we want, the health that we want. So we truly live in a world where change is changing. And in this environment of relentless change, the most important question for any organization is this: are we changing as fast as the world around us? And the answer is often no, in my experience. Often incumbents are very slow to see the future and intercept it. Let me give you a few examples. Many years ago, will show you how old I am. 25 years ago, I wrote the first article for Fortune magazine on the internet. And this is what I wrote in 1998. I said the internet will change the relationship between consumers and producers in ways more profound than you can yet imagine. It's not another marketing channel. It's not another advertising medium. It is the foundation for a new industrial order. And indeed, that's exactly what has happened. Now, when I wrote that back in 1998, at that time, Walmart was 240 times bigger than Amazon. And yet today, Amazon's market share in retailing in the United States is 7 times larger than Walmart's in e-commerce. You see the same thing happening in transportation. We've seen for years growing carbon emissions. We've watched declining price of battery power. Everyone could see these trends, but it was Tesla, not the traditional car makers, that responded first. And you can see the value of what they're doing in the market value of the company compared to all of their peers. Facebook at one time was a very innovative company. But today, every new generation grows up in a different world. You have to understand young consumers because they will be different than their parents and their grandparents. And now you see kids migrating to TikTok, and very few teenagers are still left using Facebook. So it's a very important question. What does it usually take to prompt deep change in an organization? Before you'll ask really deep questions about what business are we in, who's the customer, what's our strategy? And as you know, it often takes a crisis before a company will challenge its own beliefs and think hard about the future. You know, I think about what has happened to Kraft Heinz, right? One of the top global food producers. If you look over the last few years, their share price has been a disaster. It's way underperformed the Dow Jones Industrial Average. And when these companies were put together more than a decade ago by Jorge Paulo Lemann, he said, we bought brands like Heinz, we bought brands and we thought they'd last forever. And now we have to totally adjust to new demands from customers. Well, exactly. That is the world we live in today. And the resilience and the adaptability of every organization will be tested every day. And every organization is always standing on the precipice of irrelevance. And often, as I say, by the time we mobilize, it's a little late. So the first advantage I want to talk to you about today is how do you build an evolutionary advantage? How do you build an organization that is relentlessly optimistic, that never takes refuge in denial, that changes before it has to? And, you know, Amazon certainly has been that kind of a company. They are perhaps one of the most innovative companies today in the world. And years ago, Jeff Bezos said, my goal was to build the world's biggest laboratory. We're simply going to try more things because if you want to evolve, you have to experiment. That's a lesson we learned from life. You know, there was a young leader at Amazon. This goes back now 15 years. He was the person who invented the recommendation engine on e-commerce that looks at your history and recommends something else to you. And when he wanted to test that idea for the first time, his boss told him no. He said, don't confuse the customer by giving them, additional information. Well, Greg did it anyway. And today, a third of what Amazon sells comes from those recommendations. And here's what Greg Linden, who invented this, here's what he said afterwards as he thought about this. He said, in my experience, innovation can only come from the bottom. Those closest to the problem are in the best position to solve it. Everyone must be able to experiment and to learn and to iterate. Power, obedience, and tradition should hold no power. Now, if you want to build an evolutionary advantage, you have to build an innovation advantage. Innovation is the fuel for renewal. As Elon Musk has said, what matters most today is the pace of innovation. That's the fundamental determinant of competitiveness. Now, the good news is that human beings are very creative, right? We are creating all of the time with all of these new digital tools. Every day, people upload 500,000 hours of content onto YouTube, 3 million new blogs, 40,000 photos on Instagram, and so on. People are very creative. We have right now 31 million channels on YouTube. And yet, here's the problem. Even though 79% of executives will say innovation is a top priority, 94% of executives say their organization isn't very good at game-changing innovation. And it's not hard to see why. Here's a little survey you can do in your own organization. Here's some questions you can ask of people in the stock rooms, people at the till, people in tech support, people in purchasing, front-line employees. Ask them these 3 questions. First, have you been trained as an innovator? Have we invested in helping you grow your creative capital? Second, do you have easy access to time and funding to experiment? Would you know how to get a few $1,000s and maybe 50% of your time to go work on a new idea? Is that easy to do? And is it clear that your manager is responsible for innovation? Do they talk about it? Does it influence their compensation? And in my experience, when we ask people these questions, front-line employees, the answer is no, no, and no. So I have to go back to the CEO and I tell him, you told me, or her, I say, you told me you were serious about innovation, but you haven't trained people, you don't make it easy, and you don't hold your leaders accountable. That's not very serious. Finally, we need to build an inspiration advantage. You cannot have an innovative business unless employees come every day excited to be there, believing they can make an impact, wanting to share their ideas. And yet we know that while every person, every human being is passionate about something, all of you have some passion, maybe home and family, it may be the environment, maybe it is football. I know many people are quite passionate about football. Maybe some of them are even too passionate about football. But when you look at the data, people are not passionate at work. So this is global data from Gallup, and they find that globally it's about the same in Brazil. Only 20% of employees are fully engaged in their work. So the other 80%, they will come to work, but they will not bring their initiative and their ingenuity. Here's what this data tells us. Only 1 in 5 employees believes their ideas matter at work around the world. Only 1 in 8 say they can influence decisions, and fewer than 1 in 10 say they can experiment at work. Now, I want to show you how to change this. I've told you the challenge, building an evolutionary advantage, an innovation advantage, an inspiration advantage. Now I want to tell you 3 stories of 3 companies. None of them are retailers. 3 companies that have built these advantages. And I'd like to give you an assignment, and I'd ask you to be patient with me here as I go through these stories. But I'd like to give you an assignment. In each company, I'm going to tell you exactly what they are doing to intercept the future. I'm going to tell you exactly how they are unleashing the initiative, the imagination, the genius of every person at work. And as I do that, I'd like you to write down at least 3 things that you've learned, 3 ideas that you can take back and try in your supermarket, in your retailer, in your business. So let me start with the world's most profitable steel company, Nucor. It is not a glamorous business. It is not a high margin business. It's a very difficult and challenging business and very capital intensive. And typically we think of a steel company as having blue collar, low skilled employees, but that is not true at Nucor. Their entire advantage comes from the problem-solving ability of their frontline employees. Let me give you one example. So in one of their large plants, the team, a frontline production team, not managers, not engineers, a frontline team realized they would need to replace the giant cauldron in which they melt the steel. So they traveled around the world and talked to vendors and got bids for how to replace this. Oh, pardon me, out here in my smart building. Just a moment. Sorry for that. The building here is so smart, it's stupid, and it will turn the lights on if I don't move enough. I thought I was moving enough. So they went out around the world, they talked to vendors, and in the end, they came back and designed their own cauldron. They found a fabricator to make it. And instead of it costing $30 million, it cost $3 million. That's what the ingenuity of a frontline team can do. And if you look at their share price performance, they beat all of their other major competitors around the world. Here's just one example. But here's the philosophy behind the organization. This was their founding CEO, and please listen to this. He said this: we build our company under the assumption that most of the genius is going to be found among the people doing the work. From the outset, we shaped our business to let employees show managers how to do things that once seemed unreachable. So the company is organized into 75 independent businesses. You can imagine this being like a store, for example, or a distribution center. Each of those businesses is a plant. Each one has its own P&L with almost no corporate allocation, so truly their own local P&L. This is a $20 billion company in revenue, and they have only 100 employees at head office. They have, in a plant with 1,000 employees, they have only 7 managers. That's a span of control of 1 manager for every 135 employees. Those employees are super empowered. Every employee at Nucor, so-called blue-collar employees, can spend up to $50,000 on equipment expenses without any manager's sign-off. And they're expected to use their judgment every day. You also see that they get rewarded for innovation. So their base pay is about 75% of the industry average. But anytime they raise the productivity of their team, they get a bonus in next week's paycheck. By the way, I do know one supermarket that did the same. Every team in produce and dairy and meat, every time they lifted their productivity week by week, a significant share of that additional profitability went into their paycheck. So everyone has a very significant financial upside in innovation. And on average, Nucor employees make much more than the industry average, but they have the incentives to do that. They're like entrepreneurs who have the decision rights and the financial upside to innovate. So obviously, if you innovate, sometimes it doesn't work. This is their ex-CEO, John Ferriola. Here's what he said. He said, you cannot stretch the limit of your knowledge or your skills if you are afraid to fail. It's very typical to hear a manager or a supervisor coach a new teammate and say something like, if you're not failing, you're not pushing the limits of your abilities. How often have you said something like that to a frontline team member? Every local team, every plant is accountable for its own growth because their bonuses depend on growth and productivity. If you have growth slowing down, everyone on that team starts looking for growth. They go talk to their customers. They have brainstorming sessions. They think about what else they can make. What do we add to the product line? But everyone feels the pressure for building a growing business. Now, obviously, you cannot give people this accountability unless you train them. Every employee, when they join Nucor, every employee goes through a week-long simulation where they learn what it's like to run a steel plant. You have to make choices about hiring, capacity, pricing, product line. So can you imagine taking every employee who joins your supermarket and you spend a week just helping them understand the economics of that business? So what Nucor is doing, rather than moving decisions up to managers who have competence, they are moving competence down to the people who are right there on the front lines. Huge investment in skills. Now, all of these plans are tied together with a dense network of relationships. Before COVID and now again, there are thousands of visits a year across these plants where you're benchmarking each other. Everyone, every business shares real-time information on their profitability. And if you see another business doing better than yours, another division, you will quickly go and learn why. So best practices move very quickly across this network. And because everyone can see their performance, there's enormous pressure to level up. And that is happening all the time. Now, this company has almost no head office functions. There's not a corporate quality function, not safety, not engineering, not manufacturing, not sales, not HR, just finance and IT. All of these other things are managed in the plants, but enormous pressure to get better all the time. Finally, I would argue this company really is not a chain of command, it's a chain of trust. You know, the commitment of your teams is an immensely precious thing. And you may not think about it this way, but you, as a leader, you are in a gift economy. Every day, everyone in your organization chooses whether they will bring the gifts of their initiative and their creativity to work or not. And so what Nucor has done by sharing the financial rewards of the business with everyone, by having completely transparent information, by radically empowering people, they have created, and by the way, they have never had a layoff. So they've created an environment of enormous trust where people are willing every day to give their very best. Story number 2. This is a financial software company, Intuit. They're one of the world leaders in making software for managing the accounting of a small business or doing your taxes. Again, they have an amazing CEO, Scott Cook, now Chairman Emeritus. But they have dramatically outperformed the stock market for over 20 years. And Scott Cook began his career at Procter & Gamble. Some of you may have done business with Procter & Gamble. And he was very frustrated in his life at Procter & Gamble because the company was very conservative. It was very hard to get something new to happen. And so when he founded Intuit, he was the founder, he swore he would never let that happen at Intuit. But guess what? As an organization gets big, and you do not have to be very big, a few hundred employees, you start to get a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of meetings, a lot of PowerPoint presentations. So one day Scott kind of got angry. He'd had enough. He said, there's not going to be any more decision-making by PowerPoint or trying to persuade me as a CEO or your position or your power. He said, now, if you want to do something new, you go experiment. And so what Intuit has done, almost uniquely, I would say, among large companies, they have built an entire internal ecosystem for innovation. You know, almost every one of you in this room today, you have been working hard to re-engineer your operating model, your supply chain. You've been doing all of those things. Well, what Intuit said is we are going to re-engineer our management practices for innovation. And let me tell you very briefly what they've done. First, they have a program called Design for Delight. And every employee, from secretaries to CEO, every employee, when they join, they go through a week-long program to learn the principles of design thinking, to learn to think like innovators. So every employee is beginning to think like an innovator. Every employee is given 10% of their time to work on whatever is interesting to them, unstructured time. So no meetings, no phone calls, just work on a new project, something that you think is interesting and exciting. It's very easy to put a new team together at Intuit. If you have an idea and a few colleagues share that idea, you want to work for it, there's a very simple protocol for building an experimental team and getting a small amount of seed funding. Over the years, they've trained more than 1,000 kind of innovation experts, black belts, who you can go to who will help you push your idea forward. Every manager, every leader is expected to mentor and sponsor innovation projects. And you are measured on whether you're doing that or not and how successful those projects are. There's a dedicated budget. Every single business unit within Intuit has a dedicated budget for experimentation and new projects. And finally, they've gone to the staff groups, to legal and HR, and they said, you have to help these teams to move quicker and to be experimental. You cannot be a block. So for example, at Intuit, if you want to test something with customers, it used to take 2 months to get all the approvals from legal to do that. Now you can do that in 2 days. So here's what Scott Cookie said. As a leader, you have to install the systems and the culture that supports experimentation. As I said, experimentation is the only insurance against irrelevance. And the first priority of a leader is to make sure that you build that capacity in your organization. One last story, maybe the most radical of all. Haier, based in China, is the world's largest and most successful appliance company. It owns GE Appliance in North America, Candy in Europe. It operates around the world. And for 3 years, I was their chief transformation officer. They are not only making appliances, they are now one of the 3 global leaders in the Internet of Things, the Internet of Clothing, the Internet of Food, and so on. And they built a radically new management model over the last decade. They call it Renden Hui. It's Chinese. And what it means is putting employees and users together to create shared value. The idea behind this is every employee should report to a customer, and nobody should be reporting to managers. Everybody should report to a user, to a customer. Here's very quickly a glimpse into how it works. So they started in China by dividing a company with 50,000 employees into 4,000 micro enterprises. So every little product line, every corporate function, they divided everything into small teams, 15 to 20 people. So everyone feels like I'm working in something that belongs to me, that I can understand, that is a few colleagues, 15, 20 colleagues. So they want everyone to feel like they're an entrepreneur. Now, all of those little units have very ambitious targets, and they're not set through internal negotiation. Instead, Haier goes out and looks at the marketplace. So they'll say, in your country, here's the growth rate for the refrigerator business. And they set a target always that's 2 or 3 or even 10 times higher than the underlying industry growth rate. And they put pressure on people to exceed industry averages. And when you do, like at Nucor, you have a substantial financial upside. Employees can double or triple their salary when they dramatically outperform their competitors. So again, everyone has the financial incentives to innovate. Now, all of these little micro enterprises, they coordinate not through layers of management. Hire has only 2 layers of management, but they coordinate through internal contracts. So if I'm a little business designing 3-door refrigerators and I need some R&D help, I write a contract with an R&D micro enterprise. If I need to hire some new team members, I write a contract with an HR micro enterprise to help me hire. And in every one of those contracts, there's a performance clause, a bonus, that is only paid out when that product succeeds in the marketplace. There are no internal monopolies. Everyone, legal, HR, IT, they all have to sell their services to internal clients or they go out of business. So everyone there is subject to the discipline of the market. Everyone there answers ultimately to the customer. They also believe in open innovation. They're better than any company I know in the world of testing new ideas online, sometimes with millions of followers and potential customers that are giving them feedback. Every new service, every new product starts with an online conversation on social media. So they're mining all of the wisdom of their customers. And every little micro enterprise, all of those people feel like owners. Every micro enterprise is guaranteed 3 decision rights: the right to set their own strategy, the right to hire and fire, and the right to distribute rewards. And so you feel like this is mine. And by the way, every employee can invest in that little micro business. And if it does well, you get a dividend, which can also be substantial. And they also, like Intuit, they make it very easy for people to start and fund new businesses internally. In fact, they've created more new businesses than any company I know in the world. Now, I go much deeper into all of these stories in my latest book, Humanocracy. But I hope you can start to see here what it takes to unleash the initiative and the ingenuity of employees, what it takes to be constantly experimental. We have to get rid of bureaucracy. We have to collapse those layers. When Hire made the move to this model, which is now taught in almost every business school around the world, when they did this, they redeployed 12,000 middle managers. Those jobs will never come back. They didn't fire those people, but they now work in those micro enterprises. They just completely collapsed the organization. You cannot have 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 layers and hope to be a resilient organization. I want to close with 2 thoughts. About 10 years ago, the chairman and CEO of Hire came to visit me in my office in California. And he had read a previous book that I had written, where I argued that companies needed to become less like hierarchies and more like networks. And he asked me, Gary, has anyone ever done this? And I said, I don't think so. He said, I'm going to go do it. And they did. And this is what he said to me that day, sitting in my office. He said, we are going to encourage our employees to become entrepreneurs because people are not a means to an end, but an end in themselves. Our goal is to let everyone in that little micro enterprise become their own CEO. You know, I haven't heard many CEOs quote Immanuel Kant, the categorical imperative that human beings are an end and not a means. But if you want to build an organization that's fit for the future, that is where you have to start. So what I've really been talking about with you this afternoon is how do you unleash the everyday genius of every person in your company? I believe that the sector, retail, the supermarket sector in Brazil employs more than 2 million people. What an extraordinary wealth of capability and talent and passion you have there. But what does it take to unleash it? You have to flatten the pyramid. You have to invest in teaching people to think like business people so you can trust them to make decisions. You need to move decisions closer and closer to the front lines. We've been going the other way in most organizations. We've been centralizing things. That is a terrible mistake. Every team needs a real P&L, and they need to know how their decisions influence profit and loss, not just some vague targets and KPIs, but a real P&L. We need to invest in building social networks across employees laterally. Our organizations need to become more lateral, less vertical, so best practice moves very quickly. Every employee has to have a financial upside. And most importantly of all, every job has to be seen as essential to success. I believe that if you take these principles and you start within your organization, you ask, how can I start to operationalize these? How can I start to build this into our culture, into our DNA? You will be able to build a business that will outrun the future, that will shape its own destiny, that will grow amazing people in amazing jobs, and you will thrill your customers every day. That is my hope for you, my wish for you, and I thank you again so much for having the opportunity to speak with you.
Gary, thank you so much for being here with us. It was a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bom, então agradecendo mais uma vez ao Harry pela importante participação.
Thank you, Harry, for your important participation.